So, and apparently someone was posting that the license was changed and then it was changed back. So there's some huge internal politics apparently, and he just like left. He's like, I'm out. I'm done.
Wow.
So they're just
They
good.
Perhaps we should reach out to him.
Well, there you go. There you go, dude. That's a perfect opportunity right there. All right. Well, we should be on, I believe. I can just double check. Should be good.
Okay. Right, well, let's get started. I'm sure everyone is interested in the redemption process, and we are all set to go. We're waiting on the Ethereum instance to complete syncing, and then we are ready to go. I ended up rewriting some of the back-end scripts that Vulcanize did, and those are deployed on the instance now, tested and deployed. So we're ready to go as soon as the Ethereum instance is done, and we will have the announcement within however long it takes for the Ethereum instance to sync. Right now we're running Geth. Someone suggested using Parity instead, so we're going to try that as a backup in case the Geth thing takes longer than it's already been syncing since Sunday, so that's a little bit disconcerting. Since the snapshot was only about 9 days out of sync. But that's the update on the redemption process. I shared the back-end script revision with Ed Eichholt and David Curran, who has been helpful in making sure that all the Vulcanized assets are up and running. But I'm going to keep those private until after the redemption. And then I'll open that repo up as well for security reasons. It's not a big deal, but just, security is a major concern here. Let's see. I was extremely pleased with the pull request that Kent made. So he's got a version of the Hello World contracts compiling. I personally set up an IntelliJ environment to step through my code and compare that with his. So we have the Hello World contracts in Rolang compiling to Rosette, and very soon we'll begin testing those, running those against the virtual machine. And this is all before funding. So imagine what will happen with funding. Let's see, are there any other updates? Yes, some big updates with Casper. So Vlad and Yoichi have been kicking ass with the formal verification using Isabelle. And then at the last Casper stand-up, I mentioned to Yoichi what the scope of the approach that I was attempting. And so we had a really good conversation on Tuesday morning. 6 a.m. my time, lasted about an hour, Vlad and Yoichi and I, in which Yoichi and I spoke at length about the approach. And I can talk about that in a little more detail, but we'll sort of do Brett first. Ed, you were about to say something?
Oh, I was just curious. Could you remind us what Isabel is? I think I asked this question last week, but I forgot again.
Yeah, no worries. Isabel is one of a class of a generation of theorem provers. So it's sort of on par with Hall or Koch. It's a theorem prover.
Got it.
Yeah. And so what we talked about last time was that theorem proving is going to. Sorry. My partner walked by and gave me an encouraging look. Yes. So when you do theorem proving at this stage in the game, theorem proving isn't well integrated with standard development methodology. And one of the things that distinguishes RChain and Rolang is that our approach to formal methods is completely integrated with standard development methodology. So the formal methods basically becomes writing types for your contracts and then type checking your contracts against those types. But because the types are special and the type checker is special, we have a kind of secret sauce that allows us to catch more of the sort of nasty kinds of bugs that show up in concurrent and distributed systems. So that's kind of the lowdown on that. And let's see, what else is there in the way of updates? Ed, do we have any organizational updates?
So just I can describe generally what we're up to. Gotten a lot of great feedback on the pitch and especially on these, what I call an executive summary or 2-page summary. A lot of times, typically, we send out a 1-page summary, but we have so much to say, it's hard to fit it into 1 page and to describe our differentiators. But gosh, I've reviewed these now with probably 10 people, and some are potential investors. So that's awesome. And I'll send a post to at least one version of these. What we ended up doing was creating 2 versions. One to those that are familiar with blockchain technology, where we don't have to sort of describe it in the basics, and then we can really get specific about the differentiators of RChain to someone who will understand those differentiators. And then the other one, of course, is a bit simpler and a little bit more focused on the business value. So I'm currently editing 2 versions as we speak. Had a great interview for a CFO candidate 2 days ago, and continuing that search, but it's going well.
I guess I have to say, I mean, it probably goes without saying, but just in case, when the investment firm says you need to look for a CFO, that's a big signal. People really, people really should pay attention to that. When the investment firm says you need a CFO, that's a very, very strong signal with respect to the status of funding.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very positive.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel very much on critical path to get all of our ducks in a row on these things and working my ass off on those things. Also in parallel over the last week, had a number of great conversation about some of the early things that need to be built on top of RChain, especially on wallets and identity. So wallets are kind of seeming, pretty straightforward. There's lots of examples out in Bitcoin and Ethereum what the various types of wallets are and so forth. And on identity, though, it brings up a lot of interesting conversations, and maybe we can talk if we have time later in this about those. But there's a whole spectrum of what identity means and what the set of requirements are around it, and what pieces of those we want to address on the platform itself versus what's in the application side of it. But I spoke a little bit about this last week, but even more conversations. Actually that has evolved, and Greg and I have had a few conversations about how these different things correlate with namespaces and how we can use namespaces to address essentially, for example, we might evolve into namespaces that are fairly private to, like
banks or yeah.
Exactly, but also personally, right? We might have Ed's namespace where it's very obscure, and I hold encrypted data that syncs across several of my nodes, so that I'm sure my data that's critical is protected. Well, so that's a private blockchain, but I have redundancy, right? So that's very interesting, the kinds of use cases that opens up and the kinds of also industries that disrupts. But there's lots of other ideas around namespace. I have to write these up. And so anyway, that's just a brief update. And then another topic, I posted something in the co-op channel yesterday about project management, program management, and the issue tracking tools. We're going to talk more at the dev stand-up about that. So that's some of what I've been up to.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's perfectly reasonable to mention that, you know, at 5:30 a.m. on a Saturday morning, we were speaking with Eric Anderson of Bloomberg, right? And he had a very nuanced and well-informed understanding of identity, and lots of interesting commentary about. Like one of the topics that came up was, you know, is it identity first or application first, right? So does the notion of identity have to drive the applications, or do the applications drive the notion of identity? And Eric's response was really quite nuanced. You know, what he suggested was when you are right at financial services, then yes, identity drives the applications, right? Because the security requirements are so high, and there's a lot at stake. Whereas when you are near money, so coupons, loyalty points, air travel miles and bonus points and things like that, near money applications don't have to have the same kinds of requirements, identity requirements, as the applications can be more in the driver's seat. And by the time you get out to social media like Facebook, then the application absolutely drives the notion of identity, right? I mean, in some sense, Facebook is one of the three social applications that, is the de facto notion of identity on the internet.
Right. So Google, Facebook, and what's the third?
Well, a distant third would be Microsoft.
Oh yeah. So that was an excellent conversation. This is I think it's the third conversation we've had that I've had with Eric, and he's a fan of Greg and followed him for a long time with with mobile process calculi and other methods that are essential to fix this. But yeah, and so tying this back into the namespace discussion again. So maybe there's, for example, a namespace that whether it's private or public, but where you can there are KYC requirements so that who has an address has associated with it in the application space a verified real world identity. So that's essential in banking, right? Whether it's a person or a company. But then, of course, we also will honor the need for pseudonymous identity and tokens and so forth in another namespace. And so we can use namespace for all these kinds of use cases, which if you look at all the other blockchain projects out there and what causes them angst, this is one, right? So the whole enterprise Ethereum and all the ideas in Hyperledger and previously R3, they had requirements that Bitcoin and Ethereum out of the box couldn't meet, right? But we should be able to meet them, and namespace is one of the ways that we'll be able to enable applications to meet the requirements ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. So let's see. And there was another. There was a nice comment on the Slack. Someone was asking, if a dev comes in, and so this is to your point about beginning to set up the Jira or issue base and other things, right? So if a dev comes in saying they understand RChain and they want to contribute, what happens next, right? So I think this is a great question, and I'd love to hear from everyone as to what happens next. I mean, from my point of view, what I've hoped is that we can quickly get to a point where we've set up the issue base with bounties, and that we have essentially that there are bounties for bug fixes, bounties for larger scale feature development, and bounties for future development.
That should actually become much easier as soon as or if and when Ed's suggestion to use Jira or some other task management service becomes up and running, because then we can just kind of coordinate the tasks that are open on whatever system and attach bounties to those for the open source community as well. So that should be, that's maybe one approach to organizing that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's pretty much the approach we'd like to follow, I think. So yeah, good point. Cool. Let's see. Are there any other updates from anyone? Are we? Christian, how was Hong Kong?
Yeah, so Hong Kong was something, I'll tell you that. It really blew my mind. Obviously, it's sort of the New York of the East. Yeah, I met a few people, met up with Gatecoin and a few other people. I loved it, and I got a bunch of tips. Apparently, like, Vietnam has a vibrant blockchain startup scene. They have something very similar to what Consensus is there. So yeah, the whole market's moving, and that's why I sort of been telling a lot of people, not just you guys, that all want to start targeting the Korean market. I know Shogo is obviously from Japan. It'd be cool to go to Japan with him once we get some funding and things like that to maybe reach out to Japanese developers. You came on the show with Starbase. That's just one guy. There's plenty of projects out there that will be looking for new code bases to test and things like that. So yeah, in general terms, it's a great trip. It was a lot of fun, exhausting, but yeah, I'm ready. I'm just glad to be back and able to record the Casper Hangout and consistently and things like that. So
I really appreciate that. Thank you for above and beyond the call. And then Jim, you and I, and remind me your compatriots' name.
Kendall and
Kendall. That's right. We had a meeting this past week. Is there much you can say about that?
At this time, MaxForce is considering our proposal to write a proposal, which will bring in some funding, consulting from the co-op, but it's all looking very promising at the moment, and seems to be on track. Most of the memos of understanding and other things are technicalities that are being worked out, but they seem anxious to fund us.
Oh, very good. That's very good. I'm glad to hear it. I'm very glad to hear it. So that's.
I also I see HJ is not here, and if he comes, he can give you some more detail. But I can show you a little bit of what he set up here and where we are.
Oh, nice.
Okay, so we can enter issues in the RChain members group of a project, and they can be put in our Kanban group where I guess contributors can add people to the tasks, and we get so we get a team associated with the task, and we get a history of what's happened with it. And like I said, we can add bounties and things to this.
Nice.
As they move across into QA and completion, we can award the roles along the way to keep things moving and get deliverables here.
That's Fantastic.
Okay, HJ also set up a very comprehensive Google form for membership.
Oh, really? Can you screenshot?
And I couldn't find it. I was just looking for it, and I hope he joins so we can see it. You can see it has many more fields than most people would want to fill out, and I don't know what will be required. Probably not much of it, but the idea is that when an application is submitted, we're going to create a hash of that of the member data that was submitted, and that becomes a permanent ID that is provable. A person can show with this application information, this is my ID. It's provable.
Nice.
And I developed a prototype contract for in Ethereum, which then associates a hash with an Ethereum ID, and a process that proves the email address and the postal address if we send a code to the user to verify their address. And it's allows any factor to be proven on the blockchain, or at least not proven, but according to RChain, this was verified proof that that this account is associated with this person who's a member of RChain, allowing us to meet the Know Your Customer requirements, depending on what factors we choose to prove or show that we've proven on the blockchain. And
That's really cool.
It stores no personal information at all on the blockchain, only the hashes.
That's very good. I'm looking forward to reviewing this. Is this checked in somewhere?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. The link, I published the link in the co-op conference and the co-op channel.
Oh, does Cloud9 have a Solidity support?
I'm sorry?
I didn't. I noticed you're using Cloud9. Does Cloud9 have Solidity support?
This is ether.camp.
Oh, okay, okay.
Okay, I'm also using browser Solidity,
Right.
As a backup. And well, actually, the current state is it runs fine when I use the sandbox in either EtherCamp or Browser Solidify. But when I deploy it to testnet, it's not working.
Oh, that's interesting.
In any case, I have a whole list of to-dos here to bring it to standards and do the, for the, the layouts and the style guide and the structure of a contract, the common patterns that should be used in here. I've sort of implemented everything as simple as possible, not necessarily production ready.
Understood.
And then, of course, finally, the security considerations. Since this is a fairly low security application, but it still has to meet the mustard when it comes to security. And certain things in the process we may want to change around a little bit. I put in here I tried to decrypt the code in here, and it's sort of kludgy the way I did it. And if we change the use case a little bit, then we won't have to store an encrypted code decrypt the code on the blockchain, which is problematical.
Mm.
There may be an easy way to do it, but I couldn't find one.
This is great progress. I mean, what's your thinking? I mean, how long do you think before we might have a membership contract which we can rely upon? And
so far I haven't had much interest. DC isn't seeing it as a priority right now. I'm trying to reach out to other communities to find people who are interested in learning Ethereum. Not that I think that learners are the best people here, but basically everybody has to learn this stuff. And the best I could do is provide the links to the information, which tells them, cookbook, what needs to be done.
Sure, understood.
So I'm hoping, and I think if we, we're offering some bounties right now, thanks to RChain fan.
Huh.
But when the co-op can offer more meaningful bounties, I think it'll interest a lot more people.
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Well, that will be very, very shortly. Basically, as soon as this asset stops, complete syncing, we'll be able to. You'll be able to see the Rock Treasury online.
Yeah. Now I have a family emergency that's involving me, so I'll be probably kind of absent the next week. I mean, before this meeting, I wanted to add relevant issues to the GitHub, so that we can actually get people assigned to and working on the tasks that are important. I encourage everyone to step in and determine what's priority for the community and get the tasks in there.
Well, thank you, Jim, and sending best wishes out to you and your family.
Thank you.
This is very encouraging. I'm excited. This is great.
Yeah, I think a little encouragement from you in the Noobs Conference might get people going a little bit.
Okay, I'll be sure. I'll be sure to do that. I've just been heads down on so many things.
I know. Well, one of the main things we're trying to do is not use your time or other core people's time in doing these activities.
Yeah, well, I'll put some thumbs up in there. I'll send some love.
So, Greg, I have a question for you. It's unrelated to RChain. Can you explain to me in very simple terms what Ethereum Metropolis will be, or Metropolis will be?
What the features are in Metropolis?
Yeah.
No, I mean I haven't really pinged Vitalik on that. I've been focused on other stuff. I mean, Ethereum is, the details of what's in and what's out of Metropolis is not, it's not something I've been focused on. But we can ask Vitalik, right? The next Casper stand up, you can just ask him.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I might do that.
Yeah, cool. All right. Do we have any more updates? Well, I think we got as much covered in 30 minutes as we usually get covered in an hour. So I'm happy to yield back the time unless there's any burning questions. Let's see. I said I would go into some more detail about. Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit before we sign off. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about what Yoichi and Vlad and I discussed with respect to consensus algorithms. Essentially, Vitalik has been aggressively pursuing taking classic consensus protocols like PBFT and then creating versions that use the slashing conditions amongst validators to get essentially the same kinds of protocols, but economic versions of the same kinds of protocols. So, but he's done this by hand for a few such protocols. And the question is there an algorithm where you hand us a traditional, whatever that means, consensus protocol, and we turn a handle, and then out pops a version of that protocol that is an economic version that uses slashing conditions amongst the validators. And in the limit, right, when everybody has enough of the economic resource, that the protocol matches the behavior of the original protocol. Right, so this is kind of the idea, and the question is there is there an algorithm that would do that? And the first question behind that question is, well, what's a traditional consensus protocol? And so I have put forward what I believe to be a fairly rigorous characterization of what the consensus protocols need to be. So in particular, as consensus protocols are understood today, what they're about is more function-like than process-like. So let me try to unpack that. Traditional consensus protocols are often described just in terms of a single bit. So does everyone agree on the status of a coin flip? Did it come up heads or tails? That's one example. And so you can see everyone everyone who's participating, every agent that is participating in the consensus protocol is looking for a particular outcome. So the outcome can be thought of as the result of a function. And we can contrast that with process-like kinds of computation. And the example that I always or quite frequently give about process-like computations are computations that ensure a property. So the high watermark protocol is what's utilized in the TCP protocol, and it's the protocol that provides the exactly once in order guarantee of the channel between the two communicating parties. Yeah, I said the redemption process will run about 10 days. Okay, so one thing to recognize is the difference between a property of a communication channel versus a result or an outcome, right? That's the kind of contrast that you want to keep in mind when you're talking about function-like versus process-like. So consensus protocols are going to be more function-like. And if you look carefully, what they're doing in terms of this function-like capability is there's a little bit of a loop. The loop is all the parties send messages to each other until they recognize a certain set of conditions, and at that point they can rely upon the outcome. And that is essentially what is happening in the kind of calculations you see in a formalism called trace monoidal categories. So I've mentioned this before, but let me try to make this clearer with a diagram. And this is sort of at the heart of what Yoichi and I were discussing. So the idea is that F and G are contracts on the blockchain, and we want to be able to compose them. And you can think of F as running from X to Y, but there's a part of the but really the blockchain is there's a part of the blockchain that is overlapping, which is U, that F decomposes into. So F is, you can think of U as a little bit of a scratch pad for inner calculations that might be utilized between F and G. And then likewise, G runs from U to Z, but there's this other part of the blockchain. So think about this as the blockchain decomposed into some bits, right? And when we compose them, they overlap at the Y tensor U, or Y composed with U. And so what you're interested in, you don't need to worry so much about the X part of it, and you don't need to worry so much about the Z part of the blockchain, but you do have to worry that F and G are in agreement about the Y and U part of the blockchain. And now there's a way that you can compose F and G. If you think of F and G as having inputs at X and U, and inputs at U and Y, and outputs at Y and Z, then you can compose them in the following way. If an input comes in at X, then potentially it can go straight out to Y, or if it involves some part of U here, then it goes out of F on the U part and into G, and then it can either come out on the Z part, or if there's more agreement that needs to be met, then it goes out of G on the U part and back into F, and then they cycle like this. And you can think of this cycle as essentially the consensus mechanism. So this cycle is providing the message flow that the validators share. And so this cycle is a part of what's called a trace in the trace monoidal category. And so the idea is that the trace, that consensus protocols are expressed in a situation where the trace represents the calculation of the consensus.
So as long as you can make sure that the output of F is the input of G, then you can kind of trigger what's like a feedback loop.
That's right. It's a feedback loop until they are all in agreement.
Oh, cool.
Right, and then once and that feedback loop is the consensus protocol.
Yeah.
So my argument is that the equational characterization of a trace is a set of minimal requirements for a protocol to be a consensus protocol. That's been my argument since January of last year. And so then once there might be other, so this is one of the things that Yoichi and I discussed, is whether there are other requirements, but those are kind of minimal. And then, so the situation is actually fairly well described. So what we're saying is contracts have to live inside a trace monoidal category. The trace is the consensus protocol. And then if you want to do the algorithm that turns it into an economic consensus protocol, then that is a functor to another trace monoidal category where you have the economic conditions. So essentially, this can be characterized in terms of functors across categories that have a particular kind of shape that was identified by Samson Abramsky. And I believe that this is the right setting in which to be able to do this once and for all. So to express Vitalik's intuitions about slashing conditions once and for all. And what that gives us is a correct by construction approach. So rather than having to hand prove each one of these, every time we take a new consensus protocol and turn it into an economic version, rather than having to hand prove these, we show that all of them are algorithmically related. And when they're so when you turn the handle, you automatically get an economic version of the consensus protocol that is already proved to be correct with respect to the existing protocol. So that's kind of the idea and the approach, and how all the pieces of mathematics fit together. And this is what Yoichi and I were talking about on Tuesday. And we're going to have another meeting hopefully early next week.
That's very cool, Greg.
Oh,
I don't. Yeah. It reminds me, or it makes me. It looks like it can be generalized to. I mean, of course, consensus, but to any really pattern where you have a certain set of conditions that triggers a certain feedback loop where you kind of iterate over a process until you find whatever off ramp that you have to until you get on.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And actually, a lot of those situations were identified in the interpretations of linear logic.
Yeah. It reminds me of, because I was reading a little up on the Ethereum sharding solution recently, and in the post, Vlad mentions a semi-asynchronous method to revert state changes by kind of walking backwards through each transaction because the producer-consumer trace is it's linear, so you should be able to just kind of step backwards through it. And it seems like, or I mean, what my intuition says anyway, is that if you could kind of set up certain conditions under which you would want to do that, and then set a feedback loop into motion until you reach a certain specified, I don't know, reversion state or whatever it is, and then exit it, that would be like one approach. I don't know if any of that's correct, but that's what it made me think of.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, no, I hadn't thought about it with respect to versioning. That's an interesting idea. Yeah. Jim, you were about to say something?
Okay, well, if we, would it be instructive for us to model this in Rosette at all?
Not yet. That would be a bit early. I've already got models in Rho. So if you go to the Consensus Games paper, which I published these notes on since April of last year, but I actually have Roland contracts that provide the model for this. And I talked about them on Hangout last year. So yeah. So we automatically get Rosette because we're doing it in Roland. And
right. I guess my impatience, I wanted to set up community nodes of Rosette where F could be on one instance and G could be on another instance, and we could have remote actors communicate between them and play with this sort of idea in an actual network, which would be very cool, but I guess not that simple.
Not yet. Let me get it a little bit further along, and then we might be able to help you out, because there's background knowledge which I've mentioned before, but maybe other people aren't familiar with, and that is that the linear types are related to the pi calculus processes in very specific ways. So if you look at Wadler's work, right? So he's able to show that he establishes a relationship between the linear types and the pi calculus processes, so that the pi calculus terms become proof terms for the formula. So if a formula is valid, right, then it has a pi calculus process, at least one, that witnesses it, and that's effect. So an additional background knowledge that you need to understand is that essentially these kinds of models are models of linear logic. There's it's called the geometry of interaction construction. So we're using the geometry of interaction construction, and we've identified that the trace and the geometry of interaction construction actually is a consensus algorithm. And then we're saying that the all of the terms in the calculation, the F and the G, and the consensus algorithm get mapped onto pi calculus processes, right? In such a way that the terms correspond to proofs of the linear formulae. So, and then the way this fits into the Rollang picture is as follows. The linear types are a sub-logic or a fragment of the behavioral types of Rollang. So Rollang allows for many more kinds of computation. So these kinds of computations don't always have to converge, for example. In the linear types, they're going to have to converge in order for composition to be well defined. But in Rollang, these kinds of computations don't have to converge, and you can have races and all kinds of other things, which are good in computation. First come, first served is the way we run free markets quite frequently, right? Whoever, it's like the movie tickets or the concert tickets or the airplane tickets can sell out, right? And that's a part of the market. And so you want to be able to have those kinds of races in your computations, because those are things that we do in the real world. And that's going to be different than the linear types. So linear resources like financial resources have to be balanced. You can't have double spend. You can't have certain kinds of non-determinism where a resource ends up in two hands at once. And that so what you want is you want an embedding of the linear types, which represent your financial resources or conserved resources, into this richer type system, which is the Rollang type system, and that's the background here. So contracts, just like Rollang contracts, are going to be represented as pi calculus, or more accurately, row calculus processes. When you are talking about financial resources or conserved resources, then you're talking about the linear types, and otherwise you can use the richer Rollang types. So the linear types fit inside the Rollang types, and again, to be correct by construction, we define how that works in the first place. So
yeah, I understood that we're not going to prove correctness. I was just considering having a monoid on each side and letting it fail.
Understood. Yeah.
I did find that membership thing, if we want to see that before the end.
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead and show that now, and then we can conclude there. I'll stop sharing. There you
go. Screen share. There we go. Okay, this is the application. Let me move this thing out of the way here. And email name, address, city, state, county, GPS location, date of birth, place of birth, gender, Bitcoin address, ETH address, link to passport copy, link to electricity bill, link to bank account receipt, link to account number, blah, blah. And he also talked about
that's some pretty serious KYC.
Pretty serious, right? And then basically this, all goes into the form, and people fill out, and then we use a little Google script to compute their SHA-1 hash for each member.
SHA-1, huh?
So, maybe
SHA-1 isn't the best.
Yeah, it can be whatever you say. As long as I'm script to do it.
Yeah. Anyway, the one thing that we were that Ed and Evan and I were talking about with respect to KYC is the more personally identifiable information you provide, the more the more compute you can use per day. So the thought is that people can come in, as relatively anonymous and get anonymous compute done, but there are limits, right? And so the limits put us within the sort of framework of the law, right? So people can't use this as money laundering, and that way we can kind of support a range of possibilities and allow people to be anonymous while complying with the law.
And my philosophy was, modular contracts, and it does one thing. The contract that I developed for the membership does one thing and one thing only, and it can verify. It shows a verification of any number of factors associated with an applicant for membership in the co-op.
Nice. Very good. That fits in with this other idea as well. Very good. Excellent. Exactly, HJ. That's right.
There's HJ.
Good to see you. I'm gonna go ahead and ring off now, unless there's any other burning things we want to talk about. Yielding back 7 minutes, I think, is a great thing we can give to everyone who spends their Wednesdays in this hangout. Cool. Well, thanks to everyone, and see you next week.